Hey everybody, welcome back to Front Page Fitness. This is episode 25. I'm still Eric Trexler, joined by the Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple. Lauren, how are we doing tonight?
Well, major update from my travel issues from last episode.
Okay.
I did submit a claim through American Airlines Customer Relations, and they actually called me back.
They called you back. I'm sure that they made everything right. Everything is perfect. And I assume you got reimbursed something on the order of $10,000 to $15,000. Is that right?
That's exactly right. That's totally what happened.
Nice. Glad to hear about a victory for the little guys and little gals out there fighting the good fight. Anything new in your world?
Well, there's a lot going on in the world of women's health and fitness, per usual.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's more of the same, honestly, though.
Yeah.
I think I did my eighth interview on weighted vests the other day, and I had to say to the journalist, can someone just write it for real?
Yeah. I mean,
Because a lot of these editors are like, well, we need to keep it positive. We need to, end with something that's motivational. And it's like, no, that's not the move. Actually, the move is to be honest with the public, because the public is wading through all of this clickbait crap, and they're on social media. So I would love if a journalist would just say, hey, this is bullshit.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, couldn't you just end it with couldn't the upshot at the end just kind of be like, by the way, you could just do normal stuff that doesn't involve attaching a bunch of heavy, cumbersome things to your body? Does that not work?
I think that's exactly right. The TLDR should be, if you care about bone, muscle, fat loss, walking with a weighted vest is a waste of your time. And P.S., we actually have really good data on how to do all of those things and address them properly. And
Right.
so therefore you should be doing these things.
Yeah. Well, here's what it's probably going to take. If we can just do 100 more interviews with Lauren Colenso-Semple so that every individual outlet publishes an article on it, then perhaps that concept will saturate. So you're almost there.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, Lauren. Well, we have a lot to cover. So I say that we dive in. First of all, we need to talk about coffee. Coffee is important to me. Certainly too important. I recently started a job in a new department here. Not that recently, but people have started to notice over the last couple months that my coffee situation is troubling. This is something I've publicly battled. I've not been shy about it. There was even a stint where I wrote an article about basically getting off of caffeine entirely for a period of time.
That's true.
The thing about having a problem is that it doesn't just go away just because you abstain from coffee for a few weeks. So I am back fully in the grips of caffeine, probably worse than ever. So people in my new department have noticed and have asked me questions. Hey, I noticed that you always have coffee in your hand, no matter what time of day. And, questions like, how could you possibly be drinking that at this hour? And not that anyone's counting, but how many is that today? So I get a lot of these questions. So I'm a bit of an expert here on this new, or on the general genre of coffee and caffeine. Our new article here comes from USA Today. And the headline you gave us is Starbucks launches protein lattes and protein foam. So I am just dying to learn more about this. I'm going to show the article up on the screen here if I can. It's just pure advertisements. Bear with me, folks. I want to actually make this a more interactive multimedia experience. So here we go. USA Today, protein lattes and drinks have arrived at Starbucks. See the new menu items. So Lauren, what do we have going on here?
So a former colleague and friend alerted me to the fact because his Starbucks barista told him last week that they were going to be launching protein coffee. And I said, all right, I wonder if it will be collagen because collagen texture mixes really well, and so people tend to like it. But I bet it won't be collagen because it's expensive and it's Starbucks and they want to maximize profits. So it's not collagen. It's a protein blended milk with milk and whey that they are doing at Starbucks. It's $2 extra. So, your $8 coffee is now going to be $10. Um,
Is that really
but
how much it costs?
I mean, for a latte, it's kind of up there. At least, it depends where you buy it, right?
Yeah.
There are, but for let's say a grande, like a medium-sized latte, those are typically like $5 US. And if you add any kind of flavor to that, then that's another dollar. And now if you're adding the protein, that's another $2. I didn't get a price on the foam, but it's actually a substantial amount of protein. It's like literally dumping a scoop of whey into your coffee, but they're doing it in a way that is more blended and a bit less chunky, presumably.
Honestly,
So
yeah, don't mean to cut you off, but of all the like, fatty fitness things, I'm pretty positive about this. If you're telling me you say it was $2 more?
yeah.
So I mean, wh- that's not crazy. Like to turn it from a non-caloric or lightly caloric non-protein thing into what is essentially a meal replacement. If you're me, I'm getting my caffeine and my protein, my two major macronutrients. Two
Yeah.
bucks, honestly, that's not too bad if you ask me.
Yeah, I initially was thinking, well, this is outrageous and how dare they do this? But then I was reflecting and thinking about how much I spend on like a big tub of whey protein, and it's about $2 a scoop.
Well, I was gonna say that's really not much of a markup.
Yeah,
Like, I mean, it depends what kind of protein you get, how much,
sure.
and what kind of sizing and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's not a crazy markup. I love the idea of protein in coffee. It's something I've done for many, many years. So this is the one fitness, Lauren, our show's going to get stale if we just bash everything. So I'm honestly
That's
going to
true.
give this like a pretty solid thumbs up. And now that by the way, folks, if you're watching on YouTube, my browser just collapsed under the weight of 1,000 advertisements on their website, on USA Today, not Starbucks. But we got a few flavors: iced banana cream protein matcha, so a green tea latte with unsweetened matcha and classic syrup, topped with the new banana protein cold foam. So we're talking 24 grams of protein. And it sounds like this is from Milk Protein, which is a pretty solid source, a very solid source. We've got iced vanilla cream protein latte, a creamy iced latte topped with vanilla protein cold foam, 26 grams, and then a chocolate cream protein cold brew, signature cold brew made with layers of chocolate protein cold foam and sweetened with vanilla syrup, 19 grams of protein. Honestly, if you're watching on YouTube, these look delightful, and I'm all in. So, Lauren, finally, we got a good one. I think we done well.
Well, I will say I'm not full on promoting Starbucks because their baseline prices for a cup of coffee or a latte are absolutely obscene. So
Yeah,
there's that. But the add-on for the protein, I think, is reasonably priced.
yeah. Here's where I'll push back, because I do enjoy the good people at Starbucks. Here's where I'll push back a little bit. I feel like not every, 91% of graduate students at one point are like writing their dissertation and are like, what if I threw it all away and just owned a coffee shop and had a fundamentally different life? You know what I mean? Something that
Sure.
in your mind is like maybe less stressful. And a coffee shop tends to be a chill place. But if you've ever like sat down and thought through the financials of keeping a coffee place afloat, it's a pretty stressful thing. Like you, especially like, as someone who works in coffee shops a lot, I'm acutely aware of like if I go in and I'm like, I've basically rented a corner of your place for like numerous hours. And if all I got here was one coffee, I would have spent like $3 or $4, and that's just not a viable way to do business, you know. So I try to extend some degree of grace toward them in terms of pricing, but I get it. I mean, everyone's feeling pinched, so I'm not gonna take a side. I'm just going to present the other side of the argument and then bashfully walk away from it. Sound fair?
Fine.
All
Sure.
right. Okay, Lauren, let's move on. So you very cryptically had a headline here that just says the number one article on the health page of the New York Post. And I have no idea what it is. You wanted to leverage the element of surprise, so surprise away.
So, could you guess? Like, give me 3 guesses.
Number one article on the health page of the New York Post. Man, that's tough. I don't know where to begin. New York Post always has good stuff. It's usually very
So
rigorous.
they have health, wellness, and fitness. This is health.
This is health. Is it something about gut health?
No.
Is it something about sex or reproductive health?
No.
Okay. Is it about building muscle?
No.
All right. I feel like 3 guesses is being a good sport.
I've pasted the link.
Okay. Let's see here. I'm going to plug it in here so I can show it. The great reveal here. Okay. Beer lovers show their strength in New York City stein holding contest. Just getting destroyed by pop-ups. Stein holding contest where champ held a glass for nearly 25 minutes without spilling. First of all, very impressive. How do you feel about this, Lauren?
I don't know that this is very health related, but it's interesting. Basically, you're doing like a static front raise holding a liter of beer for as long as you can. And I believe they won a trip somewhere. So this is cool. Again, not really that health related, maybe, but you know, there was a coach who said people think it's just about grip strength, but this is about arm strength. And, you know, the arm will fail if the shoulders, cores, glutes, and even legs are not well tapped.
Yeah, you got to get the glutes involved. So I've got a picture up on the screen here of 4 gentlemen, and they're really arching the back, trying not to spill. The guy on the left is having a little trouble. But the guy on the second to left appears to be wearing some, forgive me for pronunciation, some traditional Bavarian lederhosen. I'm probably messing up all the words and the regions, but that is the first thing that comes to mind. And honestly, I love this. This is just a good old-fashioned cultural exchange. A 5-pound liter of beer with the arm extended parallel to the floor. And I'm seeing here this quote that I fundamentally don't understand. I guess I should have read the article in its entirety. But it just says, "We're young and hot," Peterson, 28, told the Post. "We might as well." And like, I feel like that quote could go along with just about anything. So honestly, this is another one. I like this. We're staying positive here.
There you go.
I agree with you. I'm not sure I would call this a health article. Certainly a deltoid article. Mental toughness article, perhaps. But hey, people are out there having fun, enjoying some culture together, and I really like it.
Do you think they drank the beer after holding it for 25 minutes? Outside.
I think that actually, if I'm not mistaken, I think that actually might be what the quote was about. Let me scroll. I'm working here. I think that they said drinking it is a warm, flat afterthought. So that's the literal sentence before the "we're young and hot, we might as well" quote. I think that's what they're saying is like, we I don't know why youth comes into that, but maybe on a hot day, there's beer there, might as well drink it, even though it's kind of flat and it's warm.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm very confused. The New York Post usually is top tier in terms of writing. They would never give me a headline with like 6 commas in it, which I think I really bashed them for previously. But in any case, sometimes you have a warm beer, and there's kind of a hierarchy in my book: cold beer, then warm beer, and then no beer. So, middle of the road isn't too bad, right?
Fair enough.
All right, Lauren. We started out with 2 light, fun, trivial matters, generally positive, and now we need to take a turn. And I am curious to see what you think about this. And I'm not going to just do like a big, long build-up, but the headline you gave me here is Link Between Tylenol and Autism. So we are going timely. We are going possibly political. We are going all in on whatever this is. So I'm showing on the screen here a piece of peer-reviewed research by Prada and colleagues called Evaluation of the Evidence on Acetaminophen Use and Neurodevelopmental Disorders Using the Navigation Guide Methodology, published in Environmental Health very recently, 14 of August, 2025. So, Lauren, where are we going with this? I ask with an exhale and a slight cringe.
Yeah, I mean, this has been in the news everywhere. So if you're listening, you've probably seen it somewhere. But what's interesting to me is how differently it has been presented depending on where you're consuming this information. And having kind of dug into not only the study itself, but also the history around the senior author who is affiliated with Harvard, I think we are approaching a bit of a difficult. Well, there's a lot of misinformation here, but it's very twisted in that it's not only the way that the author on the publication is presenting it and concluding the findings, but then also how it's being presented by the media. So it's sort of like a multi-layered presentation of what is ultimately misinformation that has real ramifications for pregnant women, frankly.
Yeah. So what's your take on the subject?
So interesting. Well, politically, the president of the United States has come out and said, don't take Tylenol. Essentially, like, if you're a pregnant woman, suck it up. If you are a pregnant woman, one of the only approved sort of pain meds for pregnancy is acetaminophen. So that's sort of one important point here. You're basically saying, this has been kind of long established as the safe painkiller during pregnancy, and we're gonna yank that for fear of this relationship between taking acetaminophen or Tylenol during pregnancy and risk of autism to the baby. Interestingly, this senior author, the one with the Harvard affiliation, was hired 2 years ago to testify in a trial about this very issue. And the judge, so there are kind of pre-trial motions that lawyers file to say, is this admissible? Meaning, and especially when it comes to expert testimony. So there's witness testimony, like, I saw this, I saw that. And then there's expert testimony, meaning they're allowed to testify about their opinion. And so you bring in, a medical doctor, a scientist, an engineer to say, based on my experience, and I can testify that this is likely to be true, or based on the science, based on the medicine, this is what I would testify is most relevant in this case. And this testimony was actually thrown out in this 2023 trial because it was deemed not relevant and not kind of scientifically sound, meaning there wasn't like a legitimate methodology and evidence to rely on it to say there was actually this causal relationship between consuming Tylenol while pregnant and then subsequently having a baby that had autism. And it seemed like there was a lot of cherry picking going on in the evidence that he was going to reference. And so now, 2 years later, we have this study that's published that once again does a lot of leaning, it's not a quantitative analysis. It's very qualitative, meaning there's sort of a lot of directions you can go. It's a bit squirrely with the conclusions you can make. And the overarching concern here is that when we look back at how he was planning to testify as this expert witness in this 23 trial, one of those one of those key kind of barriers is, has this been established in peer-reviewed literature? Is this published peer-reviewed literature? So now it is, essentially, because of the way this was introduced into the literature, even though based on this analysis, there really was certainly no way to establish a causal relationship between taking Tylenol while pregnant and giving birth to someone who, eventually presents with autism. And one of the key points here is that some of these studies were had methodologies like, oh, do you recall, like, you have a child with autism. Do you recall having taken this drug when you were pregnant 5, 10, 12 years ago? And of course, that's very, very flawed because our ability to recall that is very limited.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've heard a lot of stuff about, it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, that some of these associations shrink or even go away in studies that use like sibling control kind of analysis. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And this is one
which
where,
is like, I mean, and maybe you should explain briefly why that would be much higher quality data.
well, yeah, I think, when you're talking about susceptibility to any kind of diagnosis or medical condition where there is likely or very clearly a genetic component, or genetic risk factor, obviously the best thing that you could possibly do is, I mean, if you had good record keeping, it'd be great to say, okay, we have these mothers who took Tylenol when they were pregnant with identical twin A, but not with identical twin B. And so we've essentially fully controlled for the genetic element and the household in which you were raised, any environmental exposures within that area, if these twins grew up together and lived together. Like, the question is, how much are you getting a true comparison of exposure to Tylenol during the pregnancy? Or I guess identical twin in this case doesn't make sense because the question is when it's in the womb, right? But you get the idea. In things that aren't prenatal in terms of exposure, that's usually what you would consider like the best possible evidence would be like a twin comparison. In this case, you can't do that because the twins are in the womb at the same time. Historically, that's usually how it works. But in any case, you'd be looking at a sibling, right? Who maybe you were born a few years apart, but we're saying, okay, genetically, there's a lot of similarity. If these siblings have the same parents, they grew up in the same general place and the same general time, had similar types of, those environmental exposures, similar upbringings, similar socioeconomics, that, on and on and on. We're kind of finding areas of similarity with the, ideally, you want everything to be as similar as possible, with the one distinction or one difference being, was there exposure to prenatal Tylenol or was there not, right? So I think that's generally why people have been pointing out, again, that this association either shrinks or goes away when there are instances of sibling control analysis available. Now, I will say this, I took, for reasons that are really hard to explain, I took a whole PhD level course on fetal development, embryonic and fetal development. That was part of my exercise physiology curriculum for my PhD. Very complicated, hard to explain why. I ran out of courses to take, and I was like, is there anything physiology related that I can squeeze in here? But the one thing that I will acknowledge is when it comes to things that are potentially teratogenic, meaning, exposure during embryonic or fetal development could potentially be harmful to this developing embryo or fetus. When it comes to various teratogens, there are definitely a lot of areas where we just don't know as much as we'd like, for sure. There are many things that, basically the takeaway as I learned it in that class many years ago were basically like, we don't think this is terrible. We won't say that you should absolutely never take it, but we do encourage you to, for example, take the smallest dose necessary to get the intended clinical effect of the drug, and also take it for the smallest duration possible. Because at the end of the day, I walked out of that class feeling absolutely terrified because we learned about every birth defect that can happen, every class of teratogens. And basically, if you're exposed to too much of this in the womb at this week of development, here is the most likely negative consequence if the dose is high enough or the exposure. And so what you end up walking away with is, first of all, a strong appreciation for the statistical impossibility that any of us are here. I walked out of that class thinking it seems almost impossible to make this work, just because we focused on all the dangers, all the negatives, all the potential scary stuff. So I definitely got that impression, and also got the impression that I understand why there's a general tendency to say, let's generally try not to take too many over-the-counter drugs too frequently and too high of doses, even if they're not known to be a really potent teratogen. You understand why there's this kind of general vibe of an abundance of caution. But at the same time, like you said, Lauren, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in certain, maybe in all of pregnancy, but at least in certain trimesters, are contraindicated. So it's not. Tylenol is certainly not doesn't fall under that umbrella, but the things that we normally, if I have a headache, it's like, oh, should I take an Advil or a Tylenol or whatever. So a lot of those drugs are off the table. So like you said, Lauren, Tylenol has always been kind of viewed as the lowest risk one that is still on the table, and so you can understand why if you practice too much of an abundance of caution and you say, well, now you just have no levers to pull when you have a headache or a fever or things of that nature, you also introduce some issues. And while we're on the topic of fever, it is true, as I understand it, as not a doctor who is counseling, expecting mothers and whatnot, certainly extreme fevers can be quite dangerous to a developing embryo or fetus. So most of the nuanced articles that I've read, and here's what I like to do, Lauren, and this is something I do recommend. So, Lauren, by the time I became interested in this topic via the news, I say interested, I didn't dive into it very deeply. But by the time this kind of showed up on my radar, it was tainted as a topic, right? Because this became, for folks who aren't aware, in America, this became very political very quickly. And so what I like to do in that case is I go to articles that were written and last updated before it became political. I really encourage people to do that. If you want to say where were we before this went nuts? And so basically, I was looking back, and a lot of the really measured, nuanced, kind of carefully written articles that I found basically said, listen, of all the things you might take if you had pain, a headache, or fever, Tylenol is broadly considered to be the lowest risk to your fetus or to your embryo, or however you want to put it, at various times of pregnancy. And so therefore, that seems to be the best choice. Very few physicians would say absolutely not, never, no Tylenol. But most physicians would say take only what you need and only for as long as you need, just to err on the side of caution. And that's when you start looking at all the various things that could be teratogenic. Like I said, you start to get an understanding why that is virtually the line that you get for almost everything is like,
Yeah.
anything in the realm of medication. They'll say, these ones are completely off limits. These ones are not, but why not minimize dosage and exposure to the extent that you can? So that seemed to be, as of 2024, before things got kind of hijacked by, I've seen a lot of people on both sides of the kind of politicized version of this argument, taking Tylenol for no reason and filming it as some kind of form of protest, like taking dosages that are, even if you're not pregnant, generally you don't want to take huge doses of Tylenol because it is not great for your liver. And then on the other side, it's become a kind of political mess of people kind of being defiant in both directions, when in reality, that's usually not how you want to approach health topics.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a couple things you said there. One is the just generally speaking, when we're thinking about any sort of research that we can do during pregnancy, it's really limited. So there's never going to be a study where you like force pregnant women to take high dose Tylenol and kind of see what happens. That will never be approved. It's not ethical.
Yeah.
It's same thing with caffeine consumption or alcohol consumption or
Caffeine's a great one. Yeah, I'm sorry to jump in, but like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's always been this kind of tug of war about, can you have caffeine? How much is too much? And I honestly don't even know where we're at on that. Do you happen to know?
I know that the landscape has shifted quite dramatically from
Yeah.
being like you should never have any to it's probably not a big deal. And assuming you're not consuming coffee at the rate that Trex is.
Yeah. And
but
if you have protein foam to kind of buffer the absorption
sure,
of
sure,
caffeine.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
But I think at least for pregnant women, there are many, many rules that are sort of hard and fast that have subsequently been questioned because they're based on these potential mechanisms that may or may not play out when we think about how are people actually consuming the thing and how often are they consuming the thing and at what dose are they consuming it. So like all of those things are really important. And that's important, for any population, but it's much more difficult to actually study in this population because, of course, no one wants to expose themselves to a risk in the name of science. And so it's always been like, let's err on the side of caution, but sometimes to the detriment of these women. And that's happened with exercise, right? Like there was a line of thinking for a long time that you shouldn't exercise at all because heart rate's going to go up, blood pressure is going to go up not only in mom but also in fetus, and that could be problematic. And like that's a valid hypothesis, but what we've learned over the years is that actually, and it's probably not that big of a deal, and there are a lot of positive effects of exercise during pregnancy. So we need to keep that in mind. And anytime we go full mechanism, and I've seen this with this link of, when you have Tylenol, then this happens and that happens and it goes to the brain and this happens and therefore autism. And we have to be really, really careful about making those types of claims. And I've talked about it in other contexts, right, where there's this perceived mechanism or a potential mechanism or even a mechanism that is present in the rodent data and then it just doesn't pan out in humans. And so unfortunately, that paired with a lot of the politicized fear mongering, I fear is going to have a potential ramifications for pregnant women who were probably taking it as needed, not that often, and when we think about, as you said, a dose that is problematic in general, that's problematic for a non-pregnant person just as much as it is for a pregnant person.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I
in
mean,
this article, they also lumped ADHD in with autism, which is also problematic. So the whole thing is very, very messy.
yeah. I think no one's physician, like Lauren. I'm not currently pregnant. My physician would not tell me like, yeah, Tylenol, take literally as much as you want. Take two, wait an hour, take two more, wait an hour, take two more. I don't care. Take as many as you like. A physician's not going to tell me
Anytime,
that.
all day, every day, no
And they're
problem.
also not going to tell me, yeah, just make a habit of taking that for the next 3 months. Just do it daily. Don't even think about it. Like, so we have to remember that when it comes to over the counter medications, it's the kind of inherent implied assumption is always only take what you need for as long as you need it. And if I may, I'd like to read a little bit from an article from from WebMD, which we'll take it with
Oh
a grain of
no.
salt. It's it's lay press, but written in November of 2024, medically reviewed by Tracy Johnson, MD. Okay, and it's about what pain relievers are safe during pregnancy. And so, one little excerpt I'd like to read is under the heading NSAIDs. You may have taken ibuprofen plenty of times in your adult life, but your doctor will likely ask you to take something else to treat fever, headaches, and muscle pain when you're pregnant. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are sold over the counter and by prescription, but there are safer choices for pregnant women. Now, on the Tylenol section, it says even if your doctor says steer clear of Tylenol if you're allergic to it, if you have liver problems, or if your doctor says it's not safe for you. Even if your doctor says it's okay to take Tylenol, take as little of it as you can for as short as time as possible. Tylenol isn't linked to big problems like miscarriage or birth defects, but studies suggest that babies could later feel the effects. Some research suggests that taking it daily for long periods, 28 days or longer, could put your baby at greater risk of mild developmental delays or ADHD. Other research has shown that taking Tylenol daily or almost daily during the second half of your pregnancy could increase your baby's odds of wheezing or having asthma. But here's the kicker, Lauren. It says none of the research proves that Tylenol causes these problems, and further studies are necessary to understand the link. So basically what they're talking about here is, yes, if you scour the peer-reviewed literature, you can find some of these like retrospective association type links, but they are a very far cry from providing robust causative data, because that research is very hard to come by, as you acknowledged. And so, again, this is something that came from 2024, November, which is reasonably up to date with what is known on the topic, but also before everything became contaminated with the current kind of politicization. And so I think one thing that's worth noting is that it mentions ADHD, but not autism. And I think autism has become a huge like cultural, social, and political lightning rod lately, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I think that the current Tylenol autism stuff, I think really has zoomed in on this one potential thing, because it's, like I said, it seems to be a lightning rod that really attracts certain political actors and kind of factions of folks in the political space. So the whole politicization of the topic is, I don't think, particularly helpful. But this, this is it's a really tough thing because, like we said, we've gone back and forth. I remember when I was a kid, you would hear something about pregnant women, like we were talking about, can't have caffeine, or maybe they can have a little. It's zero alcohol or a glass of wine, right? I think that was a debate that used to happen, right?
Yeah, and there's, can you have raw fish? Or
Mm-hmm.
there are many other, what sort of products should you stop putting on your skin or in your hair? Or there's a
Yeah.
lot it's very difficult. And so I think some people have just sort of said, well, the safest bet is to err on the side of caution and not do this. But to be clear, we're always talking about this sort of retrospective link between X behavior and, let's say, risk of miscarriage. That's almost always the outcome. It's very rare that there's that much, with the exception of fetal alcohol syndrome. That's
Yeah.
like a very strong link. But the others, it's sort of a blend of mechanistic, like, well, like heart rate's too high or blood pressure's is too high, and therefore, like, the thing's probably not a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So all that is to say, to kind of piggyback off of that, like we have to also keep in mind that these debates, these conversations, these reversals, when they do occur, they are, if you wanted to frame everything as the only consideration here is to minimize even the lowest probability chance of a minor negative impact across any number of different parameters for this child at some point in their lifespan, the conclusion would always end up going toward don't do anything other than have water, an organic, perfectly tailored diet, move at low intensities, only this perfect amount that we're going to arbitrarily make up. Like, you're so far beyond the realm of actually like objective data-driven recommendations, and you're also at a point of restriction to the point of pretending that the expecting mother in this situation essentially doesn't exist. Like, we're not interested in her quality of life at all, and so like that's just not a feasible, practical, or recommended way to approach trade-offs when you're considering risks and benefits in a clinical sense. So, for example, if we approached it that way for all people and not just expecting mothers, it would be a kind of insane thing to get behind the wheel of a car. It would never be recommended because it's like you shouldn't go out there. It's dangerous out there. We have a lot of, I think it's like 100,000 automobile crash deaths per year in America alone, something like that. I just took I had to take training to learn how to drive the van at my work. So I should remember that off the top of my head. But anyway, there's a lot of deaths that happen on the road every year. And yet we drive because we're like, well, quality of life. There's always trade-offs. And so in this case, we're talking about like, well, what if maybe due to these associations that aren't particularly well controlled and are retrospective, and we're starting to really reach in terms of like, here's another limitation that we can put on pregnant women that gets between them and really the only viable thing that they had when it came to dealing with pain, fever, headache, things of that nature. I think that we need to have a really careful conversation when we're kind of discussing what would be clinically appropriate in those kind of conditions, So, unfortunately, measured, nuanced, careful conversations, we're well beyond that point, Lauren. This has kind of taken on a life of its own. But my hope is that maybe people listening to this will feel like, oh, now I understand why there's all these angry people yelling at each other on the internet, and that the actual nuance that exists in between is a little bit more complicated. And ultimately, hopefully, if you're listening to this, you are not a pregnant woman who is using this as your substitute for medical care. I would suggest not doing that, and speaking with a qualified physician when you're pregnant or not pregnant, and considering taking any kind of over-the-counter medication.
I'll just finish with what we know from the large body of data on autism is that genetic factors are the largest predictor of autism. And so, yes, we can do what we can in terms of lifestyle, whether it's during pregnancy or during early development, but ultimately this stands true when we look at certainly this conversation. When we also look at vaccines, ultimately we're looking at genetics as the biggest predictive factor.
100%. And you will notice, like, even in the article I read from 2014, before people decided to make this an autism thing, it was not an autism thing.
Right.
It was, well, we have some associations that we've observed with, maybe ADHD, maybe wheezing or asthma. So when you're talking, and this is the thing that's really tough with anything under the umbrella of teratogenic agents, whether they're medications or otherwise, is the question is not, the question is rarely like, what is the one thing this could impact? The question is, if I have excessive exposure or introduce excessive exposure to this in the womb, what is the myriad range of effects that could possibly be observed, right? And so,
Sure.
so it's a very different question of if someone says, will taking a low dose of Tylenol give my unborn child autism? We do not have evidence to say that with anything resembling a high level of confidence. It's really not where the evidence is at. But a fundamentally different question is there any level of Tylenol intake under what is currently labeled as the maximum recommended for a non-pregnant adult that could have any potential impact on, my unborn child? That is a fundamentally different question, and it's really important. And that's the second question, is where people say, well, we don't really have strong evidence to contraindicate Tylenol use fully, which is why for years physicians have always said it seems to be the safest option if you're going to take something for headache, fever, pain. Having said that, it's hard to rule out the possibility of anything happening. You're literally building a human from 2 cells to a whole person. And so it's really hard to rule out the possibility that any possible thing could happen. And so that's why they tend to say, well, so far it looks like the safest option. It's generally not fully contraindicated for an otherwise healthy pregnant woman. However, as is the case with most things, the general thing you'll see is only take what you need for only as long as you need.
Yeah.
But again, talk to your doctor. I beg of you. A real doctor. All right, Lauren. Can we move on to some lighter fare to wrap up the show? I'm begging you.
Please.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do a little multimedia experience here. So we have an Instagram post, and I'm going to try to play it. Let's see if I can make this work here. I'm going to make this smaller, move it over my face, because at the end of the day, who needs to see all that? Okay. I'm going to reset. All right, I'm playing the audio too.
Don't tell me you're still doing upright rows, dumbbell shrugs, and Arnold presses. This is the worst way as a lesbian to build muscle whilst you're working on your nutrition.
So the folks listening at home just heard that. Lauren didn't. It is an Instagram post about specifically how to grow muscle. If, Lauren, only if, huge caveat, big asterisk, only if you're a lesbian.
Right.
And this falls in line with our long genre of how to build muscle if you are Catholic, how to build muscle if you are a ginger, their term, not mine. And now we have, from the makers of those, although not the same exact makers, we have how to build muscle if you're a lesbian. So Lauren, how are you feeling now that you've ingested this content?
Well, the number one comment on this reel, which I think got like over 1,000 likes, was does it work for straight people? So there's that.
I will say that was a funny comment. Warning to all who hear my voice. There were also some comments in very poor taste that we do not endorse. But generally, yeah, that seemed to be the main genre or theme of comment is kind of what are you talking about?
And then basically the theme here was like stop focusing on isolation exercises like front raises and lateral raises and like, do your overhead press and your bench press, like, get more bang for your buck type stuff, which I think any like trainer would agree with for any population.
Yeah. And I want to be so abundantly clear here. Lest we both get immediately canceled and be cast off as bigots. I believe
lesbians have the right to grow muscle too.
They have the right to grow muscle. I wish them access to coaching as they wish to have it, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I have to mention here, Lauren, is like, if this was a post where it was like, listen, as a lesbian, I am telling you that we are of a demographic that is underserved in the fitness space, or is made to feel as an outsider in the fitness space, or for various reasons I'll explain in this post, we are made to feel uncomfortable in various fitness spaces. I would take all of that at face value. Okay, like I'm not saying that there's no room for any such arguments or accommodations, but when you are telling me, like, from a physiological perspective, this is how you ought to be training because you're a lesbian, that is where you lose me. Yeah, because like you said, Lauren, essentially it's like everything after that initial "if you're a lesbian" thing was just like general training advice that applies to every human being in exactly the same way. And I feel, Lauren, if I may, I feel like this gets particularly under your skin. I'm cool as a cucumber. I'm just vibing. I feel like this gets under your skin more than mine, if I had to guess, because you deal so much with these claims that are like, I feel like you get so much of like, listen, we have never had a study in women between the age of 65 and 71 who are predominantly left-handed, and therefore we couldn't begin to guess how they should be training. And this seems like the worst possible combination of taking that to an extreme in terms of arbitrariness, but then also layering in the first time we brought this up, it is very clear that there is a small cohort of malicious, bad actor coaches of fitness coaches who are giving the same terrible advice and saying, you need to create a niche that makes absolutely no sense and pretend that it's physiologically relevant to tailor your training to that niche. And I am begging of you, coaches, if you want to create a particular vibe or culture with your services, by all means, develop whatever niche you like. Catholics, gingers, you name it. But it's so odd the way that they're framing a lot of this messaging as if there's like a physiological distinction that is ultimately dictating how one might hope to actually see results.
Yeah, in some ways, it's funny, but it really does dovetail to everything I talk about, which is like, why are we creating these new rules for women? And certainly, if we're gonna do that, then yeah, why not? Like, if you're a redhead, like, nothing applies to you. Let's create, like, you can only train with red barbells that are, in the 13 to 17 rep range, let's say. And if you're a lesbian, then definitely no dumbbell training at all. It has to be cables, and we need to be looking at the 40 to 50 rep range. And what we unfortunately don't have a reel for, because the link disappeared between when he sent the email and when I received it. But we have a listener email that ties nicely, because he found a reel that was about training if you're Asian.
And this is our good buddy Michael?
This is. But I should mention that he says, you've mentioned my topics twice before, so as an apparent superfan, I feel like I have to mention I prefer Mike over Michael. It's literally in my email handle, and Dr. Trexler has called me Michael during both previous mentions.
So this is interesting, and I do want to make a very important point here. That is, there's no pushback to it. There's no alternative perspective or differing opinion. I neither receive the emails nor read the emails nor make the outlines. And so the important thing to recognize there is, if I called you Michael, it is because one person, a Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, has written your name as Michael in the outline. So I will not be taking this. I will not be taking the blame for this. I'll be shielding myself from all accountability. And my lawyers tell me I have very good reason to do so. So, my dear friend Mike, all of your issues in life can be attributed to Lauren and not me. And yeah, I got a kick out of his email because he said, basically not only was there an ethnicity component, but also a weight component. So it was like, if you're ethnicity X and you're over 200 pounds, this is how you should train. And unfortunately, our dear friend Mike weighs 201 pounds. So he has a very limited window for how he can actually apply these findings, this robust research. Once he gets to 199.9, unfortunately, he will no longer have access to that programming. So
and he's not fully Asian.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, he did claim to be multiracial, is the way he put it. So, yeah, and here's the thing. At least in these, we're getting in the ballpark, okay? Because, Lauren, hear me out. You could make a very strong case that there are certain weight ranges where you would say, I'm going to tailor my training services to people over X pounds because
Sure.
people over X pounds may have unique limitations to exercising certain ways or distinct limitations in the aggregate, right? So you might say, we're going to do lower impact stuff. We're going to, try to tailor it to certain ranges of motion, etc. Similarly, Lauren, one of these days, I want to have my good friend, Malia Blue. She's an excellent scientist who works at UNC. She's done a lot of research on differences in body composition estimation among different races and ethnicities. There's really limited research about differences in response to training and how that seems to potentially be similar or different among different races or ethnicities. I'm aware of one study that's actually, I think there's a study that may be getting spun up. I think they might be recruiting over in Brad Schoenfeld's lab. I believe I saw an advertisement looking for subjects for that. So all that is to say, these are at least parameters where you could be open to the possibility that that maybe there's some divergence in response to training or things of that nature. Not that the null hypothesis certainly would be that there's not, right? That's how the null hypothesis works. But yeah, the coaches out there will be no shortage of incredible things of how to niche down into the most indefensible categories possible in terms of claiming that there's divergent responses or divergent training needs. So, Lauren, all I can say is I'm just looking forward to the next one.
I do need to clarify a couple things.
Okay.
Because, listen, when your email shows up, yes, it does show up. Your email is I won't say your last name, at gmail.com. However, the name is Michael last name. And so I copied the name, not the email. However, because I'm a petty bitch, when I received this email, I did respond, "Hi, Michael, I'm catching up on these emails. The link says it's unavailable. Can you tell me more?" And I did that because I thought it was funny. Sorry, hope you're still listening. We'll call you Mike if you insist. But we like to keep it formal around here, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up. It's a very treacherous world out there where your email service may give you a name that you never actually set in the first place to your knowledge and misrepresents you. And a particularly insidious form of that is I still haven't figured out how to change this. I actually don't know if I'm authorized to change this. I assume I am, but I'm not sure. But I got this I got this job, and my university email, the default name that it has me under in the system, get ready for this, Lauren. It is Dr. Eric Trexler, PhD. So by default, it throws the double doctor sandwich in there, where you start with doctor and you end with PhD. And I really want it gone because it's the most pretentious way. Oh, heavens. Just call me Dr. Eric Trexler, PhD. No need to be formal. It's a problem, but it's like the default thing in the system. But I think it only started that way recently because I look around and none of the people that email me seem to have that affecting them. And so it seems to just be me. So, Mike, I simultaneously feel your pain and also have to defend Lauren and throw the blame back at you. Or I guess we could just blame Google at this point.
So I had a very similar experience recently. with my American airline complaint, just to bring this all full
There you go.
because you have to put a title, like how do you want to be called?
Oh my
And
God.
then
Did you put
have to
doctor
put
on your...
a suffix, like in order to submit the complaint.
Oh, Lord. So what did you do?
So it was very much the same. Like, so I like, do I just put N.A. or? And I'm like, is there an option to say? And it's like, no, you have to be Mrs. or Mister or Doctor or Sir.
And you
or,
need a
like,
suffix at the end?
You need a suffix.
Dr. Lauren Jr.? So did
Who
you...
has a suffix?
They exist. Not the majority, I would say. But so did
Like
you...
the third?
Yeah. So
guess,
did you
yeah.
do Dr. Lauren Colenso-Semple, PhD, to the airline?
So I did Doctor, and then I put a period in the
Okay.
the suffix because you just had to put something. But the
Okay.
the title was a drop down. The suffix was open ended.
Okay.
But then the person who called me Dr. Lauren
Yeah.
every chance she got to address me.
I think this is some classist stuff going on. I think the only reason that you got a call back was because they're like, okay, we got a big spender here. Lauren, the physician, had an issue with her travel. So they want to keep the big fish on the hook there. So they rolled out the red carpet. Excuse me, Dr. Lauren. I believe if you put PhD at the end, they would not have called you. They would have said,
I
oh.
fully agree with you because they want the doctor on the plane when somebody has a medical emergency.
And I mean, if we're talking like academics versus physicians, they also want the person on the plane who is like a surgeon making $500,000 a year versus the person that teaches at a university and makes like 70. So multiple benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, Matt.
All right. I mean, that's just good business. You know, you got to keep the...
What are you gonna do?
Yeah. All right, Lauren.
So the long story short is whether you are or are not a doctor of any kind, you should probably add that
yeah.
to your title when you're booking your next flight.
My prefix the next time I do that is going to be doctor, and my suffix is going to be head of surgery. And I feel like if I do that, I'm going to get automatic upgrades. They're going to say, why don't you come into the lounge? You know, I've never been into one of those
No, I think it
lounges.
should be like head of emergency medicine
Okay.
because that's what they want. It's not just that you're rich; it's that you can save a life on the plane, Grey's Anatomy style.
So this is where you and I differ. A major difference. You think that they care about the lives of the people on that plane.
That's actually, yeah, you're right.
I think that
I take it all back.
I think they want big fat wallets sitting in the rows of that plane.
Yeah.
So dead or alive. So so I'm going head of surgery, and I will report back next time I fly and see if I just like get a random uptick in the way I'm treated, various upgrades. Maybe they'll bring me an extra warm towel. You never know.
Oh, I was gonna say a hot towel. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe eucalyptus scented.
Absolutely. All right, Lauren. Wrapping up, I want to be very clear. I love and appreciate pregnant women. I love and appreciate all people, including lesbians. So if you felt that our treatment of these topics was abrasive, that certainly was not the intention. I just want everyone to have access to all the fitness information, whether they are Catholic, ginger, lesbian, or everything in between. So,
Or Asian, or over 200 pounds, or multiracial.
correct. Absolutely. It's a big...
Or want to be called an abbreviated version of their name.
Fitness is a big tent. We want everybody in who wants to be in. No need to create any kind of divisions. And I also want to acknowledge the plight and the challenge of being pregnant. I've studied it rigorously at a PhD level. First of all, it doesn't seem particularly pleasant in the moment. Also, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of conflicting information about what's safe, what's right, what's wrong, what's dangerous, etc. So, yeah, it's tough out there, and I know that the current conversations don't make it any easier because it's causing all this confusion. You have this splitting headache, and a bunch of people out here saying you're a terrible mother if you take a Tylenol, and your physician saying go for it. That's a tough place to be. So, Not fun. Sorry about all that. It's not good. Anything to add, Lauren?
Okay.
Do you want to save yourself from the incoming emails?
I don't think we did anything offensive. I think we represented the science appropriately.
That's the
I
thing.
think you're pre-planning some PR issue that it doesn't
because
exist.
that's what gets you is when you think that you didn't do anything and then you said something the wrong way. And I don't sleep anymore. I'm drinking coffee at 7 p.m. because my life is a mess. So I do worry. I'm like, I hope I said everything in the way I meant, which was with empathy and respect and love for all. Because it's easy to brace for the pushback when you're trying to be a jerk. But it's when you're not trying to be a jerk, that's when it sneaks up on you. And I always keep my eyes peeled, Lauren. But
Yeah, I'm not worried about that because I regularly say it like it is on the internet, and I deal with the ramifications that come from that choice. But I think ultimately it's better to be direct and tell it like it is than to be all mushy and try to appease everybody.
right, and I just
What
want to
up?
publicly apologize. I'm whatever I did, whatever I will do, I'm sorry, Lauren. I let you down and I let me down. Okay?
All right, sure.
All right, beautiful. All right, so that does it for this episode of Front Page Fitness. Everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you want to support, make sure you like, rate, subscribe, review, all that kind of stuff. If you want to send an email, that goes to frontpagefitnesspodcast@gmail.com and leave whatever name you are comfortable with. We will stop believing the email service, and whatever you sign your email with, that's going to be your name. Take it or leave it, folks. All right, we will be back with another episode in 7 days. Everybody have a great week.